Hello and welcome to Female Futures, Future Females. My name's Laura Jean Devanny and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Northampton with a research specialism in contemporary women writers and speculative fiction. In today's episode, I'm going to do a book talk on this novel here, The Animals in That Country by Laura Jean McKay. I remember buying this novel a few years ago because it was the Arthur C. Clarke Award winner. And I noticed that it also had an animal theme, and I thought, brilliant, Arthur C. Clarke Award winner and animals, perfect combination. This novel, however, did go on to have a really profound impact on me in terms of, I suppose that the trope, the premise that this novel is based around is that of kind of talking animals, human-animal communication, and that can sound like quite a cheesy premise, but actually the way in which McKay works with that trope really gets you questioning the nature of human relationships with animals, our role as a species in the natural world around us. And for me, that had a really profound impact, and I was blown away actually by the very innovative style in terms of the way that linguistically McKay chooses to represent the voices of animals within the novels. And for me, it really changed how I personally interact with animals around me. So as an animal lover, I would class myself as being fairly, what you could say is being animal literate, in that I've spent a lot of time around animals. I've had many pets. I used to rescue wildlife as a child, and I would say that I'm fairly good at communicating with and caring for animals. But this book completely changed the way that I now see the animals around me. And at the time, I remember I was reading this book and actually writing a chapter on it for the purpose of academic publication as well. And all of that research was going on around my old German Shepherd, Skye. And when I finished the book, I put it down and I remember just looking at that dog and thinking, I will never view you in the same way again. So as I say, it really changed the way in which I viewed and communicated with not just that particular animal, but animals in a wider sense. So I think if you're an animal lover, then this book is an absolute must. If you're not so much of an animal person, then I still would really recommend it, because I think it can change your perception on the way in which you interact with the wider world around you, particularly the natural world and the animal kingdom. So I think at this point, what I'll do is start by giving an outline of the plot. The story is set in a day after tomorrow scenario in Australia, where a pandemic has taken hold of the country, and the pandemic is the result of a virus which has been nicknamed zoo flu, because one of the side effects upon contracting the virus is that it leaves its victims with the ability to understand and participate in the language of non-human animals. And this leads to completely chaotic results. It completely disrupts the social order and causes absolute mayhem nationwide. The storyline follows the protagonist, Jean. Jean is a middle-aged woman who is also an alcoholic, this really cantankerous character, and she holds a job as a guide in a wildlife park in the Australian outback. Now, as you can imagine, that's the perfect setting for exploring the consequences of the zoo flu and the newfound capacity to be able to communicate with animals. The plot line itself follows Jean's journey as she is looking to rescue her granddaughter, Kim, who has been kidnapped by the father, Lee, who is actually Jean's son. And Lee has become estranged from Jean, reasons through which come up throughout the novel. But in the throes of the pandemic, Lee has decided to take back his daughter, Kimberly, steal her away from Jean and run away down to the south of the country. Now, as Jean is looking to attempt to rescue her granddaughter and bring her back and find her estranged son Lee, she enlists the help of Sue. And Sue is a dingo that Jean has formed quite a close bond with through her time working at the wildlife park. But obviously, now that they can communicate, that bond kind of evolves and becomes even stronger. And the two of them embark on this journey down to the south of the country from the Northern Territory to try and find and rescue Kim. So I guess I'll start by talking about one of the key themes in the novel, which is the impact of humans being able to communicate with the animal kingdom and the impact that that has on them. One of the ideas that becomes very apparent very early on in the novel is that human modes of communication are actually fairly limited. So whilst we have this incredibly sophisticated verbal code, that verbal code can be enhanced through facial expressions to an extent and body language and gesture. The main method that we would use to communicate with one another is this code. But in the animal kingdom, they have a whole array of senses that they use to communicate that we simply don't. So, you know, animals can communicate and send messages to one another via physical touch. They can leave messages through scent and then receive messages through scent as well. So they utilise fully their range of senses. And the novel explores this through the side effects of zoo flu. And I'd like to read a short extract at the point in which in the novel Jean begins to experience these heightened modes of communication. She finds it incredibly confusing and actually quite terrifying as well, in the sense that she gets this smell and she's able to then interpret that into messages and kind of hear voices, but she can't quite pinpoint what's going on. So she's going about her day-to-day work. She gets this smell. Initially, she assumes that there's a gas leak somewhere, and she's worried about this because it could kill the mice that are housed in the rodent room, which is what they use to feed all the other animals on the wildlife park. So in the novel it says, "Yellow mist, a sickly gas, seeps from behind the swing doors that lead to the hall, the mouse rooms, and the gas chamber. The pipes must be busted, the gas left on. It curls like clouds, leaking poison under the door. If it kills those mice, we'll be buggered. Nothing to feed the snakes or the raptors. I dump the bucket, take a gulp of fresh air, and launch through the doors, beating at the off switch with my grimy hand. It's already off. No gas. Gas. Wisps from the mouse room. Must have leaked in there. All the breeding pairs will be dead. The whisper's louder. I can almost make out words. Hello? The gas is thick. They'll all be dead. I haul open the heavy doors to see if I can save even a couple of them. Dozens of mice sit up on their haunches, alive, horrified. Gas rising, not from the pipes, but from their bodies. Not squeaking, screaming. They scream bloody murder, the death of everyone, death in the cages and death in the walls. All the little kids in the whole world die. My poor old dad reaches out from his early grave. Disease eats my face, crunches my bones until I'm rotting, empty, sucked dry by raptors, bones left to dust. I fall back, fumbling. What's left of my body? Blood and bits, a carcass. But I'm whole. The mice are whole. I'm going fucking crazy. There's no screaming. Just a whole bunch of fat-ass mice with their noses in the air. Run. So this communication not only gives Jean the word run, but it also is able to spark, memories of events past and almost memories of events yet to come, if that makes sense as well. So it gives her a real sensory experience in addition to the word run. And it just shows that, on the face of it, all the mice in that room are quite calm, but actually they're in a state of complete terror, and Jean is able to experience that through their scent glands. So she then runs outside, but even when she gets outside, she's still able to experience the scent of other animals that have been out and about. So I'll just read another extract so you can gain an overall sense of what this communication is now like for Jean with other animals aside from the mice. Birds are making nonsensical sounds above, but all around me, trails of glowing messages have been laid out overnight. In stench, in calls, in piss, in tracks, in blood, in shit, in sex, in bodies. A big boy wallaroo has rubbed his scent, slick as oil, over the grass at the road edge. It's like running alongside a urinal in a pub, piss cakes wafting from the bottom of yellow streams. Shake my stupid head to clear it of the meanings, but they form out of hops, barks, and whiffs. I see these words as king and ours. Bits and pieces, no damned order or sense. A drunk on the street, Kimberly talking in her sleep, until they close like clouds, moving from blobs to ships in full sail, and I see the sense, loud and clear. Fuck me, I'm a king. So it kind of takes a while for the meanings and the messages to all come together so that Jean can understand what message has been left by this scent. And it made me think of the times where I've gone on dog walks with my dog and, you know, the nose has just been glued to the ground completely, and they've been so engrossed with the smells that they're picking up. And for them, it must be like going out and reading the newspaper. So it really does convey that idea that animals are able to experience so much more than us humans when it comes to different ways of communicating and receiving information. Now, what goes on to happen in the novel is that the humans find this completely overwhelming, and that's what leads to the ensuing chaos and disorder as they can't cope with this form of sensory overload. Another idea that the novel deals with is the tendency that human beings have towards anthropomorphism. So when we try to imagine the lived experience of animals, we do so from a very human-centred perspective, and we find it very difficult to step outside of lived human experience. This is shown in the novel through the various misunderstandings that happen between Jean and Sue the dingo as their relationship evolves. And there are lots of other misunderstandings that happen between Jean and other animals, between other humans and other animals as the novel progresses. And what's interesting is that prior to contracting the zoo flu, Jean would have classed herself as being what I termed earlier as fairly animal literate. So, you know, she thought she had quite a close relationship with the dingoes in particular. She was in the habit of putting on voices for the animals and kind of playing out conversations that they were having between one another. But her first encounter with Sue after contracting the zoo flu is actually a real struggle, as she cannot understand the meanings that Sue is trying to convey. So I'd just like to read a short extract from the book where she meets Sue, and she can hear a voice calling out from the bush saying, "Queen, Queen, Queen," and she doesn't realise it's Sue at first, and then she sees Sue the dingo. Sue's face is stiff with what I guess is blood. She isn't talking through her mouth or her mind, but, like the mice and the things in the trees, through her whole damned body, upright and narrow, very proper in her way. Her voice isn't made of words either. She's speaking in odours, echoes, noises with random meanings popping out of them. A twitching rear paw, creaking sounds of welcome in her throat that don't say what they should say. No hello or hi, no formal greetings. It's, "My front end takes the food, quality. Muzzle for the queen. yesterday. You said queen again. She steps forward. Queen, open me up. Jesus, Sue. What? What? The noise its face makes. I crouch, really take a look at her. I've spent the last 7 or so years staring at Sue, but I never saw her white chest talk 2 ways. One for the open road, the time of the whole world, the wild dogs out there. The other way for inside the cage, the safety of locked doors, and a hand on her back. So it's the realisation that Jean comes to that actually she doesn't understand Sue as well as she thought she did. And actually it's the way that we've grown used to communicating as humans rather than thinking about the different ways that animals do. And these kinds of misunderstandings in the novel lead to some very difficult and dangerous situations. So in another instance, Ange, who is Jean's daughter-in-law, but also the owner of the wildlife park, she gets fooled into playing with a crocodile. She's invited to play, and that leads to a near-death experience for her. A mass of people succumb to drowning because they've been lured into the ocean by the whale song that's calling them back to their home. So it does really make you think about the way that we take for granted our knowledge of the natural world and our knowledge of the animal kingdom around us, and perhaps even our command of it as well, when in reality we actually know far less. That leads on to another theme explored in the novel, which is the significance of the role of language. And I found it fascinating to consider how McKay represents the language of animals using our own human code. And in the written form, she does so through font. So we have a normal font style for the textual language of the novel, but whenever the voices of animals are represented, she uses bold font to represent how the mammals are talking to one another and to humans. She uses italics to represent the birds' voices, and then capital letters for insects. So as the side effects of zoo flu grow more and more severe, humans go from being able to understand other mammals to then being able to understand birds, and then being able to understand insects. And as you can imagine, this leads to complete sensory overload. So, imagine going outside and listening to the birds in the trees and actually being able to understand all of those different messages all at the same time. And then a stage up from that, imagine every single insect that buzzes past and actually being able to understand the different messages that those insects are relaying to one another. And these side effects in the novel are referred to as zoanthropathy, which is defined in the novel as enhanced communication between humans and non-human animals. So this is what leads to the sensory overload for humans within the novel, and that in turn leads to this societal chaos and eventual societal collapse. And you have humans that are so desperate to not be able to hear all of this overwhelming communication that they even take to drilling holes to relieve the pressure in their skulls and so on. So actually, as the side effects gradually take hold of humans, they have an increasingly negative impact on them. And we can see this happening with Jean. As the side effects take increasing hold of her, it has a negative impact on her mental state, and that's reflected mostly through the shifting power dynamics between her and Sue. So initially, Sue refers to Jean as being her queen, and then the terms that Sue uses to address Jean kind of descend in terms of to reflect this change in power dynamics to being dog. So she refers to Jean as being good and then bad dog, before moving on to more derogatory terms like little bitch and lick spittle, before eventually coming out with the statement, I'm the queen mum. It eats later. It eats after me. And we finish there with that dehumanizing effect of the pronoun it, which Sue uses to refer to Jean, which leads on to the final aspect that I'd like to focus on within this novel, which is to do with human speciesism and the way in which we treat and consider animals as a species completely separate to ourselves. The final theme that I'd like to touch on briefly is that of human exploitation of animals and the rest of the natural world, I suppose, as well, because this is something that's particularly highlighted through the trope of animal communication. And what I really appreciate about the novel is that it's not in your face, it's not shoved down your throat, but these kind of ethical questions and concerns are raised, they are touched upon through episodes that are kind of spaced throughout the main storyline. So, you know, one question, for example, simply raised through the trope of animal communication is, if we could talk to animals, would we then still eat them? So Jean, the protagonist, is a meat eater in the novel, and we don't know if this does eventually shift her perspective on food or change her diet or anything like that. It certainly doesn't in the storyline that we're exposed to. But there is one particular episode around her encounter with a bunch of factory farmed pigs that does raise ethical concerns around factory farming and where our food comes from. So Jean and Sue are on the road and they come across this truck that's been abandoned, and these pigs are kind of escaping from this truck, and it becomes apparent that what's gone on is the owner of the pigs has been transporting them, but due to the side effects of zoo flu, he can actually hear all the chatter of the pigs going on in the back and understand everything that they're saying, and he just can't mentally cope with it, so he decides to just stop and get rid of and release all of the pigs into the wild. And you know, the description of these pigs is actually quite heartbreaking in terms of their physical state, but they keep repeating the word more, so it's more of everything. And it becomes apparent that they've never seen daylight before. They've never been in an open expanse of land before. So everything is more, and they're really happy. They're thrilled to be exploring this brand new world. But it's actually very poignant and very sad at the same time. So something like that, you know, for me personally, on encountering it did make me kind of it got me thinking more ethically about food choices, dietary choices, you know, produce and where it comes from. But it is done in quite a subtle way within the novel. So, you know, just linking back to the genre of speculative fiction and something that it does so well, you know, I've said in previous episodes that it does get you reflecting on the current state of things and thinking about, you know, actions for the future and maybe changing your mindset in terms of the future moving forwards. So I think that, you know, this theme of animal exploitation is something that the novel deals with very subtly, but also very poignantly at the same time. I know that throughout this episode I've focused quite heavily on the animal interaction side of things, but I do just want to say that this novel is about so much more than that. It's also about human relationships and human interactions, you know, the way that we treat one another and the way that human relationships develop. I really loved the character of Jean. I became really invested in her as this self-sabotaging alcoholic and her own kind of journey of personal discovery. And, you know, through her story and her various family dramas, we see her relationships evolving with her granddaughter Kimberly, you know, her relationship with her estranged son Lee, her relationship with her ex. And there are various plot twists and turns that I won't give away at this point that, as I mentioned, they do get you thinking about the nature of human relationships. The resolution of the novel, again, I won't give any spoilers away, but I found that to be absolutely heartbreaking, really tragic. Other readers might find it actually kind of a relief as well. So it would be interesting to see what any of you make of it if you do go on to read the story. But on the whole, definitely very provocative. So yes, one for your reading list, The Animals in That Country by Laura Jean McKay. I did go on to present on this novel at a conference, and I have a book chapter that I've submitted as well that should be coming out in an edited collection hopefully at some point this year. So I will probably at a later point on the podcast do a research talk that covers this novel in more detail as well. So thank you again for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I really hope I've inspired you to read this book. As I've mentioned, it completely changed the way that I view animals and the rest of the natural world around me. So I hope you find it has the same impact on you as well. It'd be lovely if you had any questions to kind of pop them in the comments, and subscribe to the channel if you'd like more updates. But hopefully I'll see you in future episodes.